Jason was enjoying a calm morning fishing at a quiet lake when something unusual caught his eye. The sun was still low, spreading golden light across the smooth water. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and a light breeze moved the reeds near the shore. It was the first time in weeks that he and his son had come outside together, the first time Jason had seen even a little spark of life in the boy's eyes. His son Eli sat next to him on the old dock, feet swinging just above the surface, holding a thermos of cocoa Jason had packed that morning. They had not spoken much, and Jason did not push. After the year they had just lived through, after losing Melissa, it was enough just to be quiet together. Jason slowly reeled in his line, checking the bait. The morning had been still, almost too still, and the soft splash of water against the dock had settled them both into a deep calm. Eli sat with his legs crossed, chin tucked into his hoodie, the thermos resting between his knees. His face was turned toward the lake, still and focused, but Jason noticed something behind his eyes, something that looked like it might be returning. A kind of light. The first clear trace of it since Melissa's funeral. Jason took in the silence. It did not feel empty. It felt full, like space being gently healed. Eli suddenly leaned forward and pointed at a ripple near the shore. "Over there," he said, his voice quiet but sharp with interest. Jason looked where he was pointing and gave a small smile. "Good spot," he replied, nodding. He adjusted his grip and cast the line in that direction, the motion smooth and familiar. The line moved through the air before landing in the water with a quiet splash. Then came a noise. It was faint at first, barely rising above birdsong and moving reeds. A light rustling, like something shifting awkwardly in the tall grass. Jason stood straighter, holding the rod in one hand and raising the other to signal Eli to be still. The sound grew louder. Then came a high-pitched cry, sharp and uneven. It was not a sound Jason recognized. Not a bird. Not a raccoon. It sounded like a call for help. Jason rose to his feet, leaving the rod behind. His face tightened as he scanned the trees. Eli stood next to him, his small hand wrapping around Jason's fingers without a word. Together, they stepped off the dock and moved toward the sound. Their footsteps made a soft crunch over dry pine and moss. They ducked under a low-hanging branch, pushed through a thin stretch of undergrowth, and stepped into a narrow clearing. There, just ahead, barely noticeable against the ground, was something small and gray. It was hunched and shivering, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Its wet fur clung to its thin body. As they got closer, the creature lifted its head. Its face was narrow but clearly wild. Pointed ears with slight tufts, wide pale eyes, and a nose that twitched as it sniffed the air. Jason stopped suddenly. "Bobcat," he said under his breath, his voice low, full of disbelief. "It's a bobcat cub." The cub cried again, desperate. Then, legs shaking, it started to move, not away from them, but toward them. "Dad," Eli said, tugging on his sleeve, voice urgent. "Where's its mom? Why is it all alone?" Jason crouched down slowly, his chest heavy. "I don't know," he said softly, "but she's in trouble." The small cub reached his feet and collapsed right beside them, her thin sides rising and falling in shallow breaths. Jason looked at her closely. Her fur was tangled and dull, dirt packed under her small claws, her eyes distant and tired. She was clearly too young to be out here alone. Without a second thought, he slipped off his jacket and gently wrapped her inside. The cub did not resist. She did not growl or twitch. Instead, she pushed herself deeper into the warmth, as if some part of her already knew this human meant safety. Eli crouched down next to him, leaning over the bundled shape. "Can we help her?" he asked, his voice soft and full of urgency, as though not helping had never crossed his mind. Jason started to answer, but another rustle stopped him. This time it was deeper, louder, and closer. Both turned their heads quickly. From the trees stepped another cub, this one slightly larger, standing firm but visibly worn. His fur stood up along his spine, and his body was tight with caution. For a moment he stared, his yellow eyes locked on the cub Jason was holding. Then he let out a low growl, not aggressive, but protective. Jason held still, keeping the smaller cub close, understanding how fragile the situation was. "Her brother," Jason whispered to Eli. The second cub stepped forward slowly. His muscles shifted with every move, his nose testing the air. Then, just as fast, he turned and ran. Within seconds, he was gone, vanishing into the brush like he had never been there. "Wait," Eli called, taking a step forward. Jason gently caught his arm. "No," he said, steady but clear. "If he can still run, there is a chance he will be all right. But this one," he looked down at the cub wrapped in his coat. "She would not make it through another night out here." The weight of the moment settled on both of them. Jason shifted the cub carefully in his arms and began walking back toward the truck. Eli followed without speaking, turning back once toward the trees. But the woods had grown quiet again, like the second cub had been swallowed by them entirely. They packed up their gear without a word. Neither of them paid any attention to the rods or bait anymore. The peaceful morning had turned into something else, something more immediate, something fragile and real. Jason laid the wrapped cub on the back seat, adjusting the vents to keep the air warm. Eli climbed in next to her, buckling his seatbelt without being asked, eyes never leaving the small figure curled on the jacket. The truck started slowly, tires pressing into the gravel as they pulled away. Jason drove carefully, watching the road but checking the rearview mirror often. The cub had barely moved. Her breathing was uneven, and a soft tremble passed through her body every so often. He glanced at Eli again. The boy had not looked away once since they left the lake. When they reached their small house near the edge of town, Jason turned the laundry room into a quiet recovery space. He used an old crate, added layers of soft towels and a couple of faded blankets that had not been used in years. The room smelled faintly of detergent, but it was warm, still, and safe, exactly what the cub needed. He dug out a heating pad from storage, turned it to low, and tucked it beneath the bedding. The cub let out a faint sound, not quite a cry, barely audible, but it was a sound of response. A sign she was still there. Jason warmed a bit of milk on the stove, testing it against his wrist before pouring it into a small bowl. Then he searched a drawer and found an old syringe from when they used to care for rescued kittens. Eli stood nearby, watching every move with focus, not saying much, but taking it all in. The way he used to observe Melissa when she baked. Quiet, focused, learning by watching. They knelt beside the crate, the light from the ceiling bulb stretching long shadows across the floor. Jason carefully shifted the cub a bit closer and slowly brought the syringe to her mouth. At first, she turned away, weak and unsure, her small body trembling with the effort. But then she caught the scent, paused, and opened her mouth. The first few drops were cautious, but soon she began to nurse eagerly, her front paws twitching, as though searching for something familiar she could not find. Eli let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. When she finished, the cub made a soft sound and curled into the folds of the blanket. Her eyes blinked once, then closed. Her breathing settled into a calmer, steadier rhythm. "She's so small," Eli said in a whisper, crouched so close his nose was nearly against the crate. "Do you think she was scared?" Jason leaned back against the dryer, fatigue from the day settling across his shoulders. He looked at his son, at the concern in his voice, the care behind the question. "Yeah," Jason said gently. "I think she was very scared. But not anymore." In the days that followed, their routines began to shape themselves around the cub. Mornings began with formula prep and crate cleaning. Evenings ended with soft purring and the gentle thuds of her little paws as she explored her small space in the house. It was Eli who gave her a name. "Ember. Because she looks like fire that almost went out," he explained. But didn't. The name stayed. Jason called the nearby wildlife rescue twice, but each time the answer was the same: they were full. The closest licensed rehab center was out of state and beyond capacity. Transporting her would be risky, and no one local was equipped to take on a bobcat cub this young. Their trusted vet echoed the same message. But his tone held something different. He seemed impressed Ember had survived it all. "She's lucky you found her," he told Jason. "Or maybe that she found you." Jason took time off from work. He told himself it was short-term, just until they found a long-term solution. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Eli committed himself fully to the routine. He learned to mix formula exactly, weighed Ember on the kitchen scale, and helped Jason build a second crate with taller sides when she began climbing out of the first. He used an old toothbrush to groom her gently and taught her how to chase a sock tied to a string. Her jumps became sharper. Her muscles grew stronger. Her steps turned quick and confident. Jason noticed something shifting in Eli too. The boy who had once gone quiet, who hardly spoke after Melissa passed, was smiling again, without being prompted. He was curious again. He laughed. And the nightmares seemed to stop. "She follows you everywhere," Eli said one afternoon, a small laugh in his voice as Ember trotted behind Jason down the hallway. Her little paws slipped slightly on the floor as she paused, glancing up at Jason like she was waiting to see what he would do next. Jason grinned. "Maybe she thinks I'm her dad." Eli went quiet for a second, then looked up at him. "She probably needed one." Jason paused. The words caught him off guard. He looked at his son and saw the quiet weight he had carried, the kind children should never know. The weight of losing someone, balanced now just a little by something new. "We all need someone," Jason said softly. "Even wild ones." One night, a storm rolled through town. Thunder shook the windows, and rain beat against the roof in steady sheets. Ember, who had been gaining independence, suddenly reverted. She cried and paced inside her crate, her tail fluffed out, ears pressed flat. Eli ran into Jason's room, wide-eyed, holding Ember tightly like a bundled blanket. "She's scared," he said quickly, climbing onto the bed. Jason, already awake, pulled back the covers. "Then bring her in," he said. Eli got in beside him, Ember nestled tightly between them. Jason turned off the light and leaned back into the pillows. Ember shifted slightly, then settled, her warm body tucked safely between theirs. Her shaking eased, and soon she was asleep. Eli stayed awake longer, eyes on the ceiling as lightning lit up the curtains. "I miss Mom," he whispered softly. Jason turned toward him, reached across Ember, and rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "I do too," he replied. "Every day." A long pause followed. Eli's voice broke a little. "She would have loved Ember." Jason nodded. "She would have." And so they stayed like that, storm outside, quiet beginning inside, something gentle and new starting to grow between father, son, and a bobcat. In the weeks that followed, Ember slipped into their routine like morning sun on the kitchen floor. She learned to use the litter box with surprising ease. She chased rolled-up socks through the hall and dragged towels from laundry piles like nesting materials. Jason built an enclosed space outdoors using leftover wood and strong fencing. He added climbing posts, a covered box, and straw for comfort. Ember adjusted quickly, like it had always been hers. The neighbors noticed. A bobcat was not easy to miss. But instead of concern, most offered interest. A man from down the road asked if he could take photos. A retired biology teacher left a field guide on the porch with a note. "You're doing something rare. Keep going." Jason began the process of becoming a certified wildlife caregiver. It took time, applications, training, inspections, but 3 weeks later, they were approved. The local center even asked Jason to share updates and clips for educational use. Ember's story was beginning to reach beyond just their home. One morning, Jason stepped outside to find Eli on the porch, reading in a hammock. Ember was stretched out across him, her long limbs hanging down, eyes closed, quietly purring. Her ears twitched as Jason approached, but she did not move. "She loves you," Jason said, smiling. Eli looked up. "Do you think she remembers where she came from?" Jason paused. "Maybe," he said. "But what matters is where she is now, and who she's with." That evening, once dinner was done and the house was calm, Jason sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee turning cold in his hands. He opened the side drawer and pulled out an old photo album. Melissa's handwriting labeled each page in tidy, angled letters. Eli's first birthday. Camping, 2014. Snow day. Lake picnic. He turned to a page that made him pause. Melissa, sitting on the dock, holding baby Eli in her arms, both of them smiling, with the lake stretching behind in soft blues and greens. Jason smiled faintly. Then he looked toward the living room, Ember curled up on the couch and Eli beside her, gently stroking her ear while watching a nature show. The house felt full again, not just with sound or activity, but with presence. There was warmth in the air now, a steady rhythm to their days that did not feel forced or covered in sadness. Laughter returned, soft at first, then more freely, without hesitation. Jason sometimes found himself humming while folding laundry. Eli would crack a joke while brushing Ember's fur. The once silent rooms no longer echoed. Instead, they carried the quiet sounds of life, the soft patting of paws, the gentle clinking of breakfast dishes, the scratch of Ember's claws on the tile floor when she got excited. The silence that had once wrapped around the house had slowly lifted. Ember kept growing. By her 7th month, she weighed over 20 pounds and could leap across the entire yard in one bound. Jason reinforced her enclosure again, adding stronger posts and better locks. He stayed up late watching training videos about working with wild animals through positive reinforcement. Gradually, Ember began to react to specific sounds, clicks, two-tone whistles, and even the low, calm way Jason said her name when he needed her to come inside. Her amber eyes would brighten when she got it right. She would often walk over and brush against Jason's legs like she was proud of herself. She built her own daily routine. Mornings started with her stretched out by Jason's boots as he drank his coffee at the kitchen table, her tail flicking lightly in the sunlight. By mid-morning, she was in the yard chasing leaves, pouncing on twigs Eli tossed toward her, or following butterflies with awkward joy. In the afternoons, she would rest on the patio, belly facing the sky, eyes half closed, while Jason worked nearby or repaired the fence for the 3rd time that month. Eli often joined her, laying down with a sketchbook or reading. He would run his hand across her fur without even noticing. Ember would nap with her head resting on his leg like it was the most normal thing in the world. Jason never forgot what she was. He reminded himself often, this was a wild animal. She was not meant for couches or porches or soft towels from the laundry. But Ember seemed to understand how their home worked. She kept her natural instincts, and they respected their limits. Still, there was something calm about her. Jason never called her a pet. He never tried to make her something she was not. She was not tame, but she was loyal. She was not gentle, but she trusted them. She had chosen them, in her own quiet, instinctive way. That choice filled a space Jason had not realized was still empty. One weekend, Jason invited over an old friend from work, a mechanic named Carl who had not visited since the funeral. They stood on the back deck with beers in hand, talking under the spring sun. Eli sat nearby sketching in a notebook, while Ember lay stretched across the porch bench beside him, one paw hanging lazily off the edge. Carl's eyes widened. That's not a house cat." Jason laughed. "No. She's family." Carl watched as Ember yawned, her sharp teeth flashing in the light. "Not worried she'll snap on you someday?" Jason shook his head. "We give her space. She gives us the same. It's mutual." Eli looked up from his sketchbook. "She came to us when she was lost, just like we were." Jason turned toward him, surprised by how natural the words sounded, and how true they were. Eli had not said it sadly or with dramatic weight, just simply, like it was a fact. Jason did not correct him, because he was right. Then, one spring morning, long after frost had vanished from the windows, Jason woke, not to his alarm, but to a familiar thump, and the soft sound of paws outside his bedroom door. "Ember." He smiled, stretched, and opened the door. She walked past him with quiet confidence, tail lifted, her steps smooth. Jason followed without a word as she moved down the hallway. She paused at Eli's door, nudged it open with her nose, and jumped gently onto the bed. Jason glanced in. Eli shifted beneath the blanket, eyes still closed. He lifted the covers just enough for Ember to slip underneath. She nestled beside him, her head tucked beneath his chin, their breathing soon falling into the same rhythm. He said nothing. He did not need to. Jason leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. A soft breeze moved the curtains, and birdsong drifted through the cracked window. Melissa would have loved this. Her son smiling in sleep, watched over by a wild animal more loyal than most people. She would have captured the moment in photos. She would have laughed, cried, and kissed them both on the forehead. A familiar ache rose in Jason's chest, but it did not overwhelm him like before. It moved through him, left something quieter behind. Life had shifted. The pain had not disappeared, it probably never would. But it no longer shaped every part of their days. It had been softened, changed by time, by care, and by a wild creature that crossed their path asking only for a place to belong. Sometimes the best parts of life do not arrive by plan. They show up unannounced, thin, trembling, barely holding on. Sometimes they do not ask to be rescued, they simply appear. And in helping them, something inside you begins to heal too. Jason thought back to that morning by the lake. The fishing rod in his hands. The ripple on the water. The quiet cries from the brush. He had not caught any fish that day, but he had found something better. A connection. A companion. A reason to smile again. A chapter he never expected, but deeply needed. On the bed, Ember stretched out, one paw touching Eli's chin. He gave a small laugh as she nudged him gently. Jason turned toward the kitchen to make breakfast, his heart unexpectedly full. Behind him, the soft sound of paws followed, close and steady.